Good evening. Welcome to the final celebration of our Centennial. Professor Susan Brody will be your host tonight. At the suggestion of then Associate Dean Brody, and I won't forget that, Susan, Dean Johnston asked me in the early weeks in 1997 to chair our Centennial Committee. 3.5 years later, we have reached this milestone. I want to thank our trustees, visitors, faculty, deans, alumni, students, and the administrative staff for their exciting support of our efforts. I want to single out one person who has been indispensable and whose energy and talents have made it all possible, and that, of course, is Gary Watson, our event management director. Please give Gary a big hand. We kicked off our celebration with a gala alumni reception in the summer of 1998. And you will recall the transformation of Plymouth Court and the law school building for that exquisite event. We followed with the Centennial convocation that featured Illinois Supreme Court Chief Justice Charles Freeman and Francis Cardinal George. Very talented members of our faculty, too many to be named, but each one much appreciated, presented exciting and highly acclaimed academic conferences and symposia over a 2-year period. They, in turn, must take credit, along with our professional staff, and especially our public relations department, for enhancing our reputation nationally as an excellent law school. Our students, alumni, and faculty put on the Chicago Fire Trial. We danced at the Centennial Barristers Ball, and last summer we celebrated our birthday with the public at large at the Daily Plaza. Our celebration has been a success, but we cannot stop now. We need to encourage our talented community to bring excellence to the law school, and through these efforts, promote our academic reputation as a great law school. For all of that, I thank you one and all. It is my pleasure now to call on our Dean, Dean Robert Gilbert Johnston.
Welcome to you all. For the past 2 years, we have been celebrating our Centennial. Tonight is the last formal event of that celebration. However, we will continue to celebrate for the next 100 years as we have celebrated our last 100 years. The goal of the John Marshall Law School was articulated at its inception by Edward T. Lee, one of the school's founders, the first corporate secretary, and in essence, its first dean. Dean Lee believed that an affordable legal education should be available for all persons of, quotes, character and competence, close quotes, regardless of race, religion, ethnic background, sex, or economic status. The reason for that goal was to assure a diverse practicing bar and judiciary as the cornerstone for a viable social democracy. The original goal, or if you wish, the dream of Dean Lee has been the guiding principle of the John Marshall Law School for the past 100 years. And I hope it will be the guiding principle by which the school will make its decisions for the next 100 years. I would like to express my thanks to Professor Ruebner, who has done a superb job in guiding our Centennial celebration. It has been an owner's job, and he has paid attention to it with great detail, imagination, and success. I would also join with Professor Ruebner in thanking Gary Watson and Marilyn Thomas, who have done excellent work in bringing about a successful celebration. One of the people who we don't hear much about in the public, of course, in bringing about this celebration has been Chairman Louis Biro, who has spent a great deal of time and energy making sure it was a success. Lou provided often enough, without people being aware of it, guidance, encouragement, and leadership on the Board of Trustees, all of whom supported the Centennial celebration with their good wishes and, of course, one of those necessary elements, the money to make it a success. So I would like to thank the trustees for all they did, and particularly like to thank Lou, who I would ask to say a few words at this time.
On behalf of the trustees of the school, all I can say is, just as the dean said, the first 100 years have gone by. We're now looking forward to the accomplishments of the second 100 years. And with friends and help, like those of you who are sitting here tonight, it will happen, and we're looking forward to it. Thank you.
I'm Susan Brody, and I have the honor of serving as your MC this evening. The dean promised me he could probably get Whoopi Goldberg to come. Having failed to do that, you'll have to put up with me for the evening. I don't think I'll be as funny, but I will promise to move along the program. It's an honor for me to serve as the MC this evening. I think it's an even greater honor to begin by welcoming you all of you here tonight. Each one of you shares something in common with each other. You all share a passion for and commitment to the John Marshall Law School. Each and every one of you here tonight has in some way given your time or your talent to the law school to help elevate it in the eyes of the legal community. So on behalf of the law school, a very special welcome and thank you to you all. As Professor Ruebner mentioned to you, in 1998, we kicked off this Centennial celebration with an all-class reunion and a special convocation. We embarked on a 2-year journey of festivities, programs, publicity, all of which have emphasized to the local and national legal community the accomplishments and contribution of this law school to legal education and to the legal profession. Tonight, we culminate this 2-year celebration by highlighting our own history. Tonight, we're going to tell our story to illustrate the slogan that we created for our centennial, a legacy of opportunity, a lifetime of achievement. Through the eyes of our leaders and their representatives, we will tell you our personal story tonight. We begin with the founding of John Marshall and our first deans, 1899 to 1908. This part of our story will be told by William Waklinski. Bill is the head of the reference department of the John Marshall Law School Library. Bill holds an AB in history, a JD, and an MLS. He has been a major contributor to John Marshall Law School, not only through his role in our library, but most importantly, Bill is the author of the John Marshall Law School Centennial History book, which took him more than a year to write, and which puts in writing the 100-year story of our law school. This book has been a major and important part of our centennial celebration, and we are eternally grateful to Bill for his hard work and magnificent job he did in creating this history book. So let us welcome Bill Waklinski to tell about our founding and our first deans.
In 1899, Edward T. Lee was an attorney practicing in Chicago. In that year, he and other Chicago attorneys began to discuss the provision of legal education for men and women who were compelled by circumstances to earn their livings in full-time employment and thus would have to attend law school, if at all, part-time. The Chicago of 1899 had but 2 evening law schools. In due course, the conversations led to action. The John Marshall Law School was chartered as an educational institution under the nonprofit corporation laws of Illinois on August 3rd, 1899. The founders were characterized much later as a group of lawyers dedicated to the principle that in the highest interests of the entire body politic, the administration of justice should be representative of all segments of society. The name for the school had been suggested by Luther Laughlin Mills, one of the foremost advocates of the day. He suggested that the new school be named after John Marshall, since at that time the nation, and especially the American legal profession, were preparing to celebrate the centenary of Marshall's installation as Chief Justice. There seemed to be 3 principles to which the founders adhered in establishing the school. First, facilities should be provided to those qualified persons whose economic position precludes them from devoting their full time to the study of law. Secondly, admission to the school should not be determined by arbitrary and discriminatory factors such as racial origin, sex, color, nor religious affiliation. Third, instruction in class should be given by active practitioners. The founders appointed Lee as secretary of the new school and authorized him to organize its first faculty. Lee was part of that original faculty as a teacher of torts and the history of English law. Other worthies assembled by Lee for this purpose included John Jewett, James Jenkins, James Cartwright, Luther Laughlin Mills, Stephen Gregory, and James Harlan. Jewett, the school's second dean, was a prominent attorney and one of the few men who ever declined appointment to the United States Supreme Court. Jenkins was a judge on the U.S. Court of Appeals and later would deliver the law school's first commencement address. Cartwright served as a justice on the Illinois Supreme Court for more than a quarter of a century. Mills was described by Lee as a brilliant lawyer gifted with rare eloquence. Gregory was a former president of the American Bar Association and would serve on the faculty for more than 20 years. Harlan, son of the first Justice Harlan of the United States Supreme Court, was later a member of the Interstate Commerce Commission. William G. Webster, an acquaintance of Lee's from Harvard, was selected as the first dean. The original location for the new school was a building known as the Old Portland Block at the southeast corner of Dearborn and Washington Streets in Chicago's Loop. The Portland Block, completed in 1872, was one of the first buildings erected in Chicago after the Great Fire. Initially, the new school rented only 2 rooms in the building, the larger to serve as a classroom, the smaller to serve as an office. The law school officially opened in the Portland Block on September 20th, 1899. Addresses were given by John Jewett, Stephen Gregory, and other members of the faculty, and by Judge James Bradwell, editor of the Chicago Legal News. The school's assets, including its library, such as it was, were then worth less than $2,500. Its operating budget for the first year was less than $2,000. The student body consisted of 3 students. Those first 3 students were Henry Zander, Martin Davidson, and Homer Fisher. Only one could pay his tuition. One requested and received permission to sleep at night after classes in the classroom. On the other hand, some 18 lawyer lecturers were available to teach these 3 students. As Lee later wrote, the school was launched with a larger crew than its passenger list. In later years, looking back upon John Marshall's founding, Edward T. Lee paid special tribute to one man, Stephen Gregory. In 1899, Gregory not only consented to teach at the law school, but also used his influence within the Chicago bar to persuade other prominent lawyers to join the faculty. Lee wrote that Gregory was the founder to whom the existence and the continuance of the school owed more than to any other man. William G. Webster was the school's first dean, but in a matter of months after the founding, he acquired interests in Rhode Island and severed his connection with the law school. In February 1900, the board of directors of the fledgling school selected John Jewett as the second dean. Jewett at this time was a famous constitutional lawyer. At the same time, the board tendered to Edward T. Lee the almost non-existent job of undertaking the active management of the school. This job took the form of being secretary of the law school, a position Lee occupied for several years. Indeed, Lee was, for a time, the entire office staff. Day classes commenced on October 2nd, 1899. Evening classes were instituted later during the same month. Lee would write that there was far greater demand for the kind of education John Marshall was offering in the evening, and the practicing lawyers whom the school wanted as teachers were more available in the evening than in the afternoon. As a result, day classes were discontinued after the academic year 1899-1900. Under this makeshift Jewett-Lee administration, the student body grew exponentially. Summer classes were held in 1900. A year later, in the summer of 1901, non-legal subjects were offered. The law school held its first commencement in 1902 for a class of 11 graduates. Also in 1902, John Marshall offered something innovative in its day, law school for women. A law class was organized for women in domestic relations, commercial law, and parliamentary law. Lee claimed it was the first of its kind outside New York City. By June 1904, the school was 5 years old and had an enrollment of 137 students. The system of instruction, circa 1904, was described as a combination of the Harvard system and the Dwight system, or in other words, a hybrid of the case and textbook methods. The catalog for 1903-1904 also reflects the nascent controversy within the profession about the increasing number of lawyers in general and the legitimacy of evening law schools in particular. Alluding to the greater numbers of law students in night school, the author of John Marshall's bulletin replies, and this is worth quoting, "This increase does not portend an inundation of the bar. It indicates a desire on the part of a growing number to learn the fundamental principles of the law and to understand the reasons underlying them. It means, in time, the addition in the community of an intelligently conservative element making for law and order and good government." Dean Jewett died in 1904. He was succeeded by Judge Arba N. Waterman, a former cavalry officer in the Civil War. By the time he became dean, he was a judge of the Illinois Appellate Court. A year later, he also began to lecture at the law school on constitutional law. Waterman resigned as dean in 1909, but remained president of the faculty until 1914. Lee later wrote that during Waterman's deanship and presidency of the faculty, the school increased in numbers and in efficiency and became recognized for its thorough instruction and its high standards. An important development during Waterman's deanship was the establishment of John Marshall's first postgraduate school, or graduate school for lawyers. The law school began to offer a one-year graduate program in September 1906. When Judge Waterman resigned as dean in 1909, John Marshall's Board of Trustees did what by then may have seemed obvious. The fourth dean of the law school would be Edward T. Lee. who would serve in that capacity for 34 years. He would be helmsman during the Great War, Prohibition, the Great Depression, and well into World War II. He would also lead the school during years when the legitimacy of part-time legal education vis-a-vis the legal profession and the academy was at stake. Thank you very much.
John is the Assistant Regional Director for the Securities Exchange Commission here in Chicago. He holds a BA in Economics, a JD from John Marshall, and an MBA from George Washington University. He's also a member of our Board of Visitors. Most importantly, though, John is Edward Lee's grandson and is able to tell the story of Edward Lee and his deanship at John Marshall Law School from a very unique perspective. Let's welcome John Lee.
I'm honored to be here for this wonderful Centennial celebration. It's a great opportunity for all of us to look back at the school's rich history while looking forward to the century that lies ahead. My grandfather, Edward Lee, as many of you know, was a very soft-spoken, gentle-mannered man. But I'm sure if he were here tonight, he would let out with a loud, "Bravo, job well done." What you might not know about him is that he might look a bit disapprovingly on our more boisterous toast of celebration. Yes, Edward Lee, in addition to staunchly promoting the principles of John Marshall, was an outspoken proponent of prohibition in his day. Indeed, we have discovered that in 1912, he ran for Congress on the prohibition ticket, in Chicago, no less. In thinking about tonight's remarks, I spent some time talking with my family to gather their thoughts and remembrances. We know that our grandfather would not only be profoundly pleased that John Marshall has survived and flourished, but he'd also be grateful to each and every one of you that the mission of the school has remained intact. That mission has been critical to John Marshall from its very early days. It's been challenged and opposed, sometimes by forces as big as the ABA. In the long run, we believe that the school's mission has been the very reason that it survived. My grandfather talked about this mission so many times and in so many ways. Quite simply, what he believed was this: law school must be available to every interested, worthy scholar, regardless of their age, creed, or race. In a democratic society, lawyers must be representative of the people they represent. Diversity among law students benefits the legal profession and society as a whole. Diversity as to race, sex, and nationality. And the practice of law is enriched fully by the life experiences of students who work during the day and study at night. Similarly, he held true to the belief that John Marshall would be enriched as an institution by having practicing lawyers and judges on the faculty rather than only full-time professors. Finally, he believed that the practical study of law must be innovative. Hence, he helped create graduate programs in patent law, practice court programs, and other new teaching techniques that made the school's curriculum cutting edge. Against this background, I say with great confidence that my grandfather would be immensely proud of John Marshall, its accomplishments, and the enviable position it holds in the legal community. He would be proud of the more than 15,000 degrees that John Marshall has awarded since its founding in 1899. He would be proud of the leading faculty and innovative curriculum that John Marshall offers, a curriculum that has kept up with social and technological advances. Perhaps most of all, though, my grandfather would be proud of the diverse group of men and women that have graduated from John Marshall, men and women from all walks of life. As the son of Irish immigrant parents living in Connecticut, my grandfather knew that for many like himself, part-time evening law school was not a choice, but a necessity. Edward Lee worked his way through school from a very young age. He operated an elevator nights during high school. By the way, trying to study at night in a dark elevator had a very adverse effect on his eyesight. As he would say, it was time to find another line of work. His hard work, though, paid off as he graduated from Harvard and then Columbia College Law School, which is now the George Washington University Law School. That's why he didn't take too kindly to the ABA's move to, in effect, outlaw the study of law in the evening. Had the ABA been successful, access to law schools would have been denied to those, like my grandfather, who had to work during the day and study in the evening. You'll be happy to know that he called these restrictions un-American and counterproductive. In the same way that Grandfather Lee believed that an evening law school played a vital role in society, he was also extremely forward-looking in his beliefs about educational and career opportunities for women. We believe that my grandmother, Margaret Noble Lee, may have been the inspiration here. Margaret graduated from DePaul University, received a master's from Radcliffe, and was a reporter and feature writer for the Tribune. She wrote under her own name, and we have discovered under the pen names of two men, believing that it was easier to sell her pieces under a man's name at the time. She wrote articles on women's suffrage and racial discrimination, and in 1906, Margaret Lee graduated from John Marshall as one of the early women graduates. Finally, my grandfather's passion for John Marshall and legal education as a whole was indeed far-reaching, but what mattered most to him always was the students themselves. In fact, in going through his papers, we've discovered many, many promissory notes and thank yous that indicate he not only helped found the school and lead it for several decades, but he also helped finance a few of the grads along the way. In closing, I'd like to thank Dean Johnston, Professor Ruebner, Assistant Dean Beach, and all the John Marshall trustees. My wife, Barb, and I are honored to be here. And when I look at my daughter, Catherine, I can't help but wonder if she might be a fourth generation Lee at the law school, age 9. If she decides to take that path, I'm sure she'll receive a fine education. Thank you.
Our next speaker, Evelyn Lee, will tell us about the years during which Noble Lee served as dean, 1944 to 1974, again, a 30-year period. Noble Lee was Edward Lee's son, and Evelyn is Noble Lee's daughter. Evelyn is a clinical psychologist here in Chicago, and she specializes in psychotherapy. She completed her graduate work at the University of Chicago and has also held a number of teaching appointments. As the daughter of Noble Lee, Evelyn has many stories to tell us about her father, his life and passion as dean of John Marshall Law School, and how it all affected her growing up and her family life. I welcome Evelyn Lee.
Again, good evening. I'm delighted to be here, and it is a great pleasure It is with great pleasure that I attempt to convey to you something of the flavor and impact of the Noble W. Lee years, 1943 to 1974. These 31 years following his father's 34 years, an extraordinary 65 years of the John Marshall's 100-year history, have to be a record in familial leadership in legal education. The philosophy and values that my cousin John has just described that persist in an almost seamless way is in itself a rare event in the development of any educational institution and an essential ingredient in the character of the John Marshall Law School. During his tenure, there was a major expansion of the curriculum, the faculty, and the physical plant with the acquisition of 2 additional buildings. The post-war onslaught of students brought a new vitality to the school. The John Marshall was put on a stable financial foundation and became accredited in the 50s. The Law Review was reinstated, as was the moot court. In the 60s, there was the last and definitive battle with the American Bar Association over the revision of the standards for legal education. And as many will without doubt remember, there was always the comprehensives. His impact on legal education was much broader than most people realize today. What is now taken for granted was in fact a radical departure from the classic study of law in the past. Practice courts, training and advocacy, and the continuing dialogue between theory and practice reflected in the ongoing use of the case method were not a part of the traditional education of the time. He fervently defended the legitimacy of evening division and freestanding law schools, not only as necessary, but as a fresh resource for the enrichment of the profession as a whole. Relying on part-time faculty members, individuals actively engaged in their careers, was, he felt, a major benefit to students. What was unusual and also criticized then is now, ironically, a crucial component in the current operations of most colleges and universities. Late one afternoon in my 16th year, I was standing with my school books on the 5th floor, I think, of the law school, where my father was giving me final instructions about whatever, gesticulating with the ever-present cigarette, when the elevator opened, full of students talking noisily. I was ready to get on when Dad had just one more thing to say to me. The students held the elevator. Finally, I stepped on, the doors closed, and we rode down in silence. Then from the back of the car came a voice. "What's he like to live with?" Those who studied law during his era remember him as a rare bird, and I hope that these short remarks convey to you something of the forceful and charismatic person who shaped so many generations of lawyers. These were the days of the dancing dean in Springfield, the Chicago Bar Show chorus line, orange wig and all, of the smell of pine sol in the lobby, much to the despair of Helen Thatcher, where on Sunday afternoons, some of us kids accompanied him to the school. We played tag in and out of the offices and the stairwells and the large men's room on the 1st floor. And there was Quincy number 9, the bar across the street, where he would have a drink and late-hour discussions with students, where, with a nod to the bartender, his screwdrivers, good because they had orange juice, would arrive sans alcohol. In contrast to his father, Dean Lee was somewhat wild and woolly in appearance, striding the halls, hunched forward, the inevitable cigarette in hand, attending as much to details of the physical maintenance as to the developments in legal education. His work habits were eccentric, to say the least. Our mother exercised a great deal of forbearance with his long, even interminable hours. She was undoubtedly the only woman who could locate her husband at 1 or 2 a.m. by calling the Standard Club doorman, who would look across the street and see if the dean's office lights were still on. Believe it or not, he did have another life or two. He loved to travel, taking us on auto trips punctuated by lessons in American and European history, or amazing stories of his driving an ambulance at the front during World War I. On our annual trips to North Carolina, my mother's home state, we would take different routes in order to see a variety of state capitals and historic sites. All this was an extension of his deep, ongoing love of history, and it was contagious, even to an occasionally reluctant young audience. Yet his abiding passion was the law school, which some thought was family-owned. Psychologically, it might well have been. However, from my point of view, it would be better said that the family was owned by the law school. Helen Thatcher, Ruth Nelson, Hazel Hill were like family and visited us in Michigan. Later, Laureen, who typed the letters, dictated late at night to the dean's spring-offs, as he liked to refer to us. And Della joined our sphere, as did so many members of the faculty. Dean Lee's dictaphone accompanied us on all family vacations, and the tapes would be sent back to be transcribed from all over the United States, as well as England, Europe, and the Balkans. May I add here that my late brother Noble, then less than 5, referred to this machine as the period paragraph. And there were blue books. Blue books that would be graded in the well-lit back seat of the old Packard as my mother would drive us all to Michigan, her North Carolina home, or some other destination. He had yet another life, that of a legislator, also dear to his heart. There, too, always the dean, he established an orientation course for freshmen and would tutor them through the process of becoming effective legislators, regardless of political persuasion. He also schooled them in the Illinois Constitution and in legislative procedure, topped off with a personally conducted tour of Springfield's historic sites. As a lawmaker, was he a picayune nitpicker, as a reporter once suggested, or was he a shrewd and observant analyzer of legislative bills who could ferret out their inherent weaknesses and vulnerabilities? Lawmaker and law professor came together in his fervent belief that the law is a precious and precise thing and that it is sacrilegious to be careless about making it. He knew that every detail in the law would have real and practical consequences, even as a man of extraordinarily broad-ranging knowledge and interests. His pedantry could have drifted off without substance were it not for his capacity to always bring the details back to the larger conceptual picture. From the earliest days of poll watching in areas where he felt he may have been the only one there without a gun, to precinct captain, to the role of sacrificial lamb for his party when he ran against the unbeatable Democrat Paul Douglas, who incidentally was linked to us by marriage, and finally to the legislature and the law school. My father had an intense loyalty, both philosophically and in his enormous capacity for action, to the highest ideals of democratic government. On the personal side, there was an assumption in my father's life and values that one should be self-sufficient and resourceful. Ever prepared for a pioneering life on the frontier, even as we lived in a refined and urbane society? How often, for example, have I needed to call upon my knowledge of how to prime a pump, how to clean pots and pans with beach sand, or prime and paint an old car? Yet the meaning behind these experiences was clear. Dad believed in the development of curiosity and competence, and that one should be informed in the philosophical sense to meet the breadth of life's challenges. It dovetailed with his view of the characteristics best suited for life in a democratic society. It is reflected in his stewardship of the law school that he believed in ideas not solely as abstractions, but as powerful forces in society, meant to be guidance systems for diligent and active work for the common good. Behind that woolly front was an optimistic belief in the law, in society, in humanity. Thank you.
Fred Herzog, our next speaker, is someone who many of us, myself included, had the honor of working with during his deanship for 9 years from 1974 to 1983. Born in Austria in 1907, he received a JD from the University of Graz in 1931 and from the University of Iowa in 1942. Both were awarded with high distinction, and his study at the University of Iowa was the result of being chosen for a fellowship there because he was one of only a few carefully chosen European jurists who had so distinguished themselves that they were awarded an opportunity and fellowship to study American law. During his career, he served as special counsel of the Metropolitan Sanitary District of Greater Chicago, First Assistant Attorney General, Dean at IIT Chicago-Kent, and most notably, Dean of John Marshall Law School. Dean Herzog is not only a brilliant jurist and leader, but professionally and personally, his principles and conscience make him a magnificent role model for us all. His zeal and commitment to John Marshall contributed significantly to the great place that the law school is today. Most importantly, his charm and sense of humor make him one of the most engaging storytellers that I know. I welcome him to tell his story. Dean Herzog.
Thank you very much, Susan. You know, at my age, I look each morning in the newspaper at the senior sports page, which is the obituary. And if I don't find my name therein, I know I'm still alive. The only thing is when I have to put my shoes on in the morning, I ask why the good Lord has not put the toes where the knees are. When I assumed the deanship of the law school, I did it with a clear intention to make John Marshall a nationally recognized legal institution. If I succeeded in this task, it was due to the combined and cooperative endeavors of a dedicated faculty, my associate dean, the late Helen Thatcher, and Ron Olson, now Judge Olson, a hardworking and efficient staff, and above all, a devoted board of trustees. And last but not least, the outstanding and indefatigable efforts of the president of our board of trustees, Mr. Louis Biro, who literally spent countless days and nights, I might say without any remuneration, laboring for the welfare of the school. Thus, we succeeded in becoming members of the Association of American Law Schools, acquired the former Rothschild building on State Street, which provided space for up-to-date new classrooms, a courtroom, faculty facilities, and a large, modern, efficiently run law school library. However, in all these endeavors, we never deviated from the guiding principle upon which our law school was founded, to afford each qualified person, regardless of race, creed, gender, or national origin, the opportunity to study law and become a respected member of the legal community. It was with this aim in mind that we instituted the so-called conditional acceptance program, where we did not look merely upon a law school applicant's law school admission test score, but rather upon his or her background, his or her working experience, if any, his or her prior schoolings, and the courses the applicant took as an undergraduate student, and other factors which we considered relevant. The success of that program is highlighted by the fact that some of our best students, including editors-in-chief of our law review and later eminent lawyers, were originally admitted as students in a conditional program. In making all those decisions and other various determinations, we proceeded, to paraphrase Martin Luther King, not upon the notion what was expedient, political, or popular, but rather were guided by the dictates of our conscience, which told us what was right. However, in closing, I must confess a secret thought which I have never before disclosed to anybody. I had the idea to establish a Vienna coffee house. After all, you can take the boy out of the country, but you can't take the country out of the boy. As I said, I wanted to establish a Vienna coffee house on the roof of our State Street building, where during the warm months of the year, faculty, students, and staff could meet informally and exchange ideas. Of course, as I just indicated, I never mentioned that idea to anyone, and particularly not to Mr. Biro and the Board of Trustees, who would have thought that I was hit by a severe case of galloping senility. Concluding, let me say to you rather in the words of the poet,
If any thought of mine, as said or told, has ever given delight or consolation, you have repaid me each 1,000-fold by every friendly sign and salutation. Thanks for the sympathies that you have shown. Thanks for each kindly word, each silent token that teaches me when seeming most alone. Friends are around me, though no word is spoken. Thank you.
Our next speaker, Leonard Schrager, became a professor at John Marshall in 1980 after having served as managing partner at Sacknoff, Schrager, Jones, and Weaver for 17 years, where he practiced in all areas of commercial law and taxation. Dean Schrager served as our dean from 1983 to 1987. What was particularly impressive about Dean Schrager's term is that during that period of time, he exhibited a vision for the role the law school would play in the local legal community. I introduce him to tell you about that.
Thank you very much. You see before you the first ordinary person to serve as dean of this law school. I followed some great acts, including my personal hero, Fred Herzog, who to me has been the epitome of what a lawyer, scholar, educator, and human being ought to be. This was not an easy task. The year 1983 was kind of an exciting time for us. We were in the process of moving from a non-traditional law school to a traditional law school. We found that a lot of things in the past that we had done no longer really made sense for us. My first official act of dean, which was created for me by Dean Herzog, was to announce the formation of the Center for Information Technology and Privacy Law, which had been headed from 1983 until now by Professor George Truveau, my good friend. We recognized at the time that the demand for legal education was not always going to be constant. We felt that our school was too large to guarantee the kind of quality student we wanted, so we began to reduce the size of the school by about a third. We reduced our entering class in September from 370 students to 240 students, and our entering class in January from 160 to 120 students. And that has been, looking back, a wise move. As part of the movement toward a more traditional kind of law school, the faculty developed a constitution which was designed to enable the faculty to participate in a more organized and more significant way in the decisions of the law school. Favorite project of mine, which I started back early when I became dean, is the Legal Education Access Program, which is a program designed to identify minority students who do not meet the standard test scores that we would have normally required, but whom we felt, if they had extra help, might make it in law school. And today we can look back on perhaps 100 or more minority lawyers practicing law in Chicago who would not have been there but for our program. We continued the major construction program begun by Dean Herzog. We completed the courtroom on the third floor, now the Boehm courtroom. We expanded the library space. We began plans for a new student lounge on the second floor to replace what was affectionately called the pit before. And so I think we have made students very happy with this change. We made many curriculum changes, and many of them prescient in the sense that we find that modern studies in legal education have justified some of the things we've done. We came to the conclusion, as many of you recognize, that the study of law is not only a study of humanities, but it is the practice of law is a vocation. And we expanded a lot of our offerings in the practical area. The one-year legal writing program that we had became a two-year program in lawyering skills. We vastly increased our offering in the trial practice area to the point where I think we exceeded what anybody else in the country did, only to find that everybody subsequently copied what we were doing. We expanded our moot court programs. We laid the groundwork for our highly prestigious fair housing clinic. And finally, I spent a very interesting year and a half negotiating with the Chicago Bar Association for the sale of our partially used building at 321 South Plymouth Court. President Biro and my wonderful board of trustees who supported this every step of the way will attest to this. It was a very interesting time. And we sold our building at 321, which was only partially used by us, to the Chicago Bar Association for the new headquarters of the Chicago Bar Association. I don't think any of us would have predicted that a large part of this absolutely gorgeous building, which you can see by just looking out the window, would ultimately be owned by the law school. So this is something that I guess if you lay the groundwork, good things can happen, right? And I would like to just for 1 second recognize some of the people who are not here today, who not only helped me but became wonderful friends. And the people who are still here, I can say this to when I see them. But Helen Thatcher, who spent I think upwards of 45 years at the law school as associate dean, who was so helpful to, I think, all of us and so important to the reputation of the school. And my very dear friends, Mel Lewis, who also taught at the law school for 40-some years, and Art Scheller, who, while he didn't teach that long, somehow every year kept getting Professor of the Year awards. And I asked him, Art, how do you do it? And he said, I listen. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker, Peter McGovern, served as dean from 1987 to 1990, and he is currently a member of the faculty. Dean McGovern brought a wealth of experience in law school administration and higher education to the law school. For prior to becoming dean, he was a dean or acting dean at 3 other law schools and also served as associate dean and assistant dean and university counsel. Dean McGovern is a natural at organizing institutional concerns and motivating the people who make up the institutions. Many of us, myself included, were so motivated by Dean McGovern to push the school forward during his tenure as dean. Let us welcome Dean McGovern.
Good evening. Thank you very much, Susan. That was very nice. I appreciate it very much. It is a distinct honor and privilege to have a chance to say a few words to you tonight. I'm very honored that you'd asked me to do that. We did this 10 years ago when we did the 90th, and it's just so exciting to be here for the 100th, and I appreciate that very much. I am deeply honored by the people who came before me as the dean, and equally honored by the people who have followed me as the dean. I have, as we celebrate 100 years of this fine and very exciting institution, This is my 28th year in legal education and my 13th year here at John Marshall, and it's been one of the most creative existences I've ever had, and you've made it possible. And I just love independent legal education because I think that's what we're all about, even though our future is growing and getting more exciting as we continue. The years of 87 to 90 were extremely active, and I'm the out-of-towner. I'm the person who comes into town and doesn't know anything about Chicago. I'm coming up from Miami. I've been out in South Dakota. I've been down in Indiana. And so it's a whole new world to me. And it was exciting and it was active. And as Leonard and Dean Herzog had done so many things, I was the guy who was coming next. And it was exciting because we did the visions that were there before we carried through. And it was a most amazing experience. We had opportunities to merge the CBA library and the John Marshall Law School library, and with a deadline, and I thank very much Randy Peterson for the help. We changed the curriculum and restructured it, and I thank Claude Carr for that because as a faculty person, he made it work. We did all kinds of things. 2 weeks after I arrived, after Leonard's wonderful plans, I ended up signing a contract for $2 million to do the remodeling that he actually planned for. We had ICL up on the 12th floor. It just never ceased to continue. 6 months after I was here, we did the American Bar Association's annual 7-year visitation. That kept us going. It was an exciting time. And I was privileged to have a chance to do and use the skills that I had developed over the past years to really make this work. Leonard stole some of my lines because we hadn't compared notes. But what really makes a good school is the cooperation and the assistance and the colleagues that you work with. And with the short time I had, I didn't want to say thank you to everybody else, but it's the Board of Trustees, it's the Board of Visitors, it's the faculty, it's the staff that make it all work. It's Dean Oswald in the registration office, it's the admissions and financial aid people who go through untold amount of hours convincing people that this is where you should really have your legal education. It's the Anselmo and his staff that makes the whole building work and keeps us alive and keeps it operating all through kinds of weather and all the adversities that go on when you have an institution of about 2,000 people who are running in and out every particular day. It's the library staff who gets you the assistance you need so that you can appear to be competent when you walk into your class and teach them. Because what happens is they give you the resources and the service that you really need. It's the various secretaries for the faculty and the administrative assistants and the development staff and the whole rest of the people that make this the kind of institution it really is. It's Teresa in the mailroom who just makes sure that we get the correspondence that comes. It's McKenna in the telephone operating system that gets you the messages when you're out of the country that tells you there's a concern and need to get back to the school. It's the kind of people who really, really make it work. And that's what John Marshall is about. It's the faculty, it's the staff, it's the administration, it's the Board of Trustees operating to create a very, very fine educational institution. It was a privilege to be the dean of this school for those years, and it's been a privilege to continue because it's allowed me to use all our creative juices to do the kind of things that we're doing. We have an extremely bright future. We have a very, very good system. We have a solid JD program. We are now probably the 5th or 6th largest provider of master's degrees in the United States because of the vision of Dean Johnston. It is an amazing place to come in every day. I walk down to school every day happy. It's a good place to be. I work with good colleagues. I have a good association, and it's a school that's taken care of me. And the person who's helped it make it work is Kate, because when you've been the dean and you work, and I calculated 1 week, we worked 82 hours of constructive time for the school when I was a dean. I figured I'd keep the time schedule 1 week to see what it really took between the 6:30 to 7 o'clock breakfasts, the lunches, the afternoon reception, the dinner, and whatever else went on until you got home at 11 o'clock at night and had to meet somebody at 7 o'clock the next morning and ask them for their funds. It was a constant kind of activity. And what makes it work is the support and the comfort you get when somebody believes in what you're doing. And I thank my spouse very much for that. It's made it really very good. Thank you. Lastly, and this is where I hadn't worked it out with Leonard, but it was really true. It was a privilege to be the dean, and it was sad because I want to give recognition to the people, at least in my very limited time in 100 years, who are people who need to be remembered. Charlie Padden, who was on the faculty when I first came, and he died, unfortunately. Art Schiller, he was the toughest guy I ever had to deal with as a dean. He was a wonderful fellow, brighter than I ever hoped to be, and just an interesting and a wonderful colleague. Mel Lewis, unfortunately, died, and I was in Australia on a sabbatical leave, and I'm very sorry that I wasn't here. Dean Thatcher, interesting, wonderful person. We had some different conflicts of things, how we looked, but we worked, and we had a simple vision. This had got to be one of the best independent law schools and the finest legal educational operations possible. And that's what we did, and I was very pleased with that. Florence Ford, one of the staff people, you may or may not know her, but as one person with 15 or 1,400 students running around, handled all the financial aid for this institution. Unbelievable amount of work that lady did. That's the history of John Marshall. That's the contribution of John Marshall. And I was pleased to be a part of it. I want to thank the staff, I want to thank the colleagues, and I want to thank the Board of Trustees, and I want to thank all the people who are here tonight and some of the people who couldn't make it. What makes a great institution is your support. Without your support, we cannot achieve the mission of this institution, and we're committed to the mission of this institution. Thank you very much. We got a bright future. Stay with us. Thank you.
Our next speaker, Louis Biro, will tell us the story of the deanship of Honorable Howard Markey, who served as our dean from 1991 to 1994. As I was preparing my notes for this evening, trying to decide how to introduce Mr. Biro, two very contradictory thoughts came to my mind. One was, he needs no introduction. We all know Lou and his magnificent contribution to the law school. And the other was, he needs the greatest introduction of all. For Mr. Biro's own history has been linked to John Marshall for more than 50 years. He graduated from the law school in 1948. He served as an adjunct faculty member and has served as president of the Board of Trustees for more than 30 years, and he remains in that position today. In that capacity, he has been at the helm of much of the tradition, growth, evolution that we honor here tonight. Indeed, honoring the law school, by definition, is inextricably bound to honoring Lou Biro. One of the great accomplishments that Mr. Biro can speak of was hiring Dean Markey to serve as our dean, and he's going to tell you that story.
Thank you, Susan. And Susan, I want to tell you, I've lied to you. When you asked me, could I keep it very short and still give everything about Dean Markey, I said, I'm sure I could work it out. But as I stand here now, and I listen to members of the Lee family, and I listen to Fred Herzog, and inasmuch as I came with the dinosaurs, and this is really my 33rd year as president, which is a form of insanity, to say the least, you know, it made all the memories start to go in. All of the deans who have spoken here were deans during the period where I was on the board and incidentally was president of the board. When I started the school going to John Marshall, before I left for service, Edward was the dean. And I had a year or so of law school, and then Uncle Sam sent me on a fully paid vacation to the South Pacific. And when I came back, of course, what happened was Noble was the dean. And Noble, I have to say this, and it's not part of the Markey thing, was one of the most remarkable men that I have ever met. I came back to school, and Al Gallo, who's sitting at the same table as I am, and I had been in law school at Marshall before leaving for service, and met again coming back at the beginning of 1946 to start school, and we had to make a decision. Do we take credit for the courses we've had, or are we going to be honest and say, who the hell remembers any torts or contracts and so forth? And the obvious answer was we didn't. And we had both decided, no discussion, we hadn't seen one another all these years, we're going to start school over again. We had a class made up completely of veterans. It was the first day class that started. And every one in that class but one had been in law school somewhere, not all at Marshall, some at the University of Chicago, Sam Marigus, who graduated with us. Some had been in Eastern schools, but marriage does peculiar things. The war ends, the demographics change, people move around, they came here. And Noble, for the first time, had a class that was over age and grade, all of whom had been in law school before, although we were starting again to go in. And all of a sudden, at the end of about 6 months, for the first time, I think, that he ever had a class say, Dean, either you're wrong or Professor so-and-so was. And Noble would look as though he was going to blow his top, and he loved it, of course. He really did. All he wanted to do was egg us on. I just have to tell you, because if you didn't live with a man like this and you didn't know what it was a matter of something that you really missed. And I don't think that even you and the other members of your family, who, while you had it, you never really saw him as he went through the machinations with us in there. And we are the beneficiaries of it, and the school is. The other thing is the mention of Fred. I have to tell you, when I say Fred, I mean Fred Herzog. One, I am both indebted to Fred and I have an ambivalence. My wife and I were introduced to one another by Fred Herzog and his wife. His wife was Irene's closest friend. And I was a widower, and because and I told Fred I've forgiven him already for that, so it's all right. But the interesting thing was that Noble Lee, in true Noble Lee fashion, never said anything to anybody that he decided he was going to retire. And one day he called me and said, I want to have lunch with you. I said, yes. I came down, we went to Binion's, and he looks, he says, I'm quitting. I said, when? He says, as of now. And I said, well, you can't do that. I have to find another dean. The school has to go through this. The American Bar has rules for this. Well, I didn't know what to do. I walked back and I said to Helen Thatcher, who, after all, was an academic. I'm not, I try earning a living practicing law. I says, what do we do for this? She says, talk to Fred. I says, who's Fred? Well, I knew of Fred Herzog by name and certainly by reputation. Fred, is those of you that didn't know, had been Dean of Kent and left Kent and became the first Assistant Attorney General of the state of Illinois. Not a paper dean of AG. He ran the office, and he taught a course, and because at heart, he was a teacher, not an active individual. I had lunch with him, and I told him, I have to have someone to be acting dean. And with that Viennese accent, he tells me, I can't do that to you. I promised the general that I would stay and run the office. So I went and called the Attorney General, and I talked to him, and I says, I've got to have him. Somebody's got to watch the store and keep this school running to go through, because it's evident that Dean Lee wants to leave. The answer was that after the Attorney General talking to him and so forth, he came in to become the acting dean. And then we had you have to have a search committee. And people come in from all over the United States to be interviewed to become dean. And I asked Fred to sit on that board, and all of a sudden, as we went through all this, all I heard from the various members on there, what are we doing this for? We got Herzog here. None of these people go to him. So I talked to Herzog, and no, can't do that. Had to go back to the Attorney General and tell him, look, he doesn't really want to be in your office. I am positive he would say yes if you would release him from his promise. And the answer was, we were fortunate enough to have that happen, and he started us on the road to go through. My last story, and I must tell you, is because of what you said about people thought we were proprietary. When we leased the first floors in the so-called Rothschild building to put the library in, I, of course, being a little more jerky then than even I am now, I'm going to save the school money. I wasn't going to hire a lawyer. I did the negotiating with the law firm, and Mrs. Rothschild owned the building. And she was up in years, and her nephew was there as the negotiations went on. And I was dealing with one of the associates in a very large law firm here who represented her. And when it came time for the lease, one of the senior partners came in who obviously had her estate, which she would be handling in there and so forth. And as we finished all the discussions, he looked at me, and I could see with great discomfort he wanted to know, where's Noble? I says, I don't know. I suppose he's at the school someplace. So he says, well, who's going to sign the lease? I said, I am. And he looked at me. I says, in case you don't know it, John Marshall is an Illinois corporation. It's an eleemosynary corporation. He says, you know what? I always thought the Lees owned it. I says, you know what? They always thought they owned it too. And that was a true statement. All right. Let me take just a few minutes. I'm sorry. I apologize to you. The acquisition, if you will, of getting Howard Markey to become a part of our family and to join our school, I think, in my own honest opinion, was just a continuation of the fortunate 10 strikes that we have had in our 100 years in going through. We were looking for a dean, and we had the ever-present search committee. And we had just about finished interviewing everyone that had applied. And one of our faculty members came up to me and said, did you know that Howard Markey gave a lecture here the other day? He says, he was just great. And I knew who Howard Markey was. He was obviously one of the outstanding jurists, and I also knew that he had gotten his advanced law degree at John Marshall. He was been a Loyola graduate, been on the federal bench for years. And I said, he says, you ought to ask him about becoming dean. And I says, well, what makes you think that he would even be interested in becoming dean? And the answer I got was, I asked him. He says, and here's his telephone number. If you want to call him in his chambers, this is the God's honest truth, and so forth. I called him. And he answered the phone in chambers, and I explained to him who I was, and I wanted to know whether or not he, was really interested in becoming dean, and if he was, would he be willing to come in and meet with the decanal search committee? And the answer I got was, when? At any rate, he came in. We did interview him, and obviously, as you know, he did become dean. And that, to me, was one of the most remarkable experiences I ever had. When Howard Markey became dean of the law school, I suddenly became recognized by all the district court judges that I didn't know, federal judges, and by all the judges of the Seventh Circuit who obviously, because of the law bulletin and other things, knew who I was, even though they had never spoken to me, and wanted to know, and you'll excuse my language, how the hell did you get him to step down and become your dean? Because there were no people in the federal judiciary that did not know and respect Howard Markey. He was the most remarkable jurist, I think, that there had ever been, because of the fact that as he was sitting in his appellate court, he would travel all over the United States, and he sat as a visiting justice in every circuit that there is in the United States to go in. He came to Marshall, and I had one difficulty. As you may or may not have known, he's a retired brigadier general. He's a retired federal judge. He's a retired chief judge. And now he was a dean. And I warned him of one thing. I was damned if I was going to call him general, because I'd only been a corporal and I wasn't going to salute him after he came in. That he came in with a tremendous background, had not been, quote, an academic, if you will, but was an excellent, excellent lawyer. And above all, because of both his judicial and his Army experience, he was organized. He knew that if you were going to be an administrator, you had to set up your own group, you had to have an organization, you had to have people that were in. And during his period as dean, which unfortunately was very, very short, he did so many things. He didn't institute all of them. But if they were getting ready to be started or they were going to go in, it was with his power and with his drive that the International Law Center was really pushed on. The workings with our European connections, the school in Prague, the Chinese Patent Law Office, these were all pushed and followed through because of Howard. The Fair Housing Center and the Fair Housing Clinic, which may have been spoken of, but when Howard came in, they had to become a fait accompli. You had to have it, you had to do it, we're going to go in with it. Computers were a part of the school, but he took one look at what there was and he said, the computer system you have is inadequate. The 11th floor has to be greatly enlarged. We have to have it so all students can have the opportunity. And if those of you who have not been to our 11th floor and see what you have, you know it's right. It was during his term that the Beam Library actually followed through. He helped tremendously with Phil, who would look with sort of a jaundiced eye. If you didn't go to school at Marshall, you couldn't really belong. And I said, yeah, but he did go to school here. That's where he got his intellectual property background. The Hall of Distinction, when you walk through, with the pictures being in there, the John Marshall material there, these were all the workings of Howard Markey. And then came the frosting on the cake, if you will, as he came in. You had retired Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States who came to visit John Marshall. We didn't have people like that. Justice Scalia came to visit and speak at John Marshall. Justice Kennedy came to speak and visit at John Marshall. Justice Ginsburg came to speak and visit. We are deserving, in my own humble opinion, of having people like this visit. Without a Howard Markey, they would never have happened, nor would there have been people like Judge Ray, Judge Bright, Aldous come and do it. We're deeply indebted to Howard I regret deeply that he can't be here with us tonight. Thank you, Dan.
Our current dean, Gil Johnston, has been in that position since 1994 when he took over as acting dean after Dean Markey retired. In 1995, he became our leader and is still our current leader. Dean Johnston is known as a man of unmatched humanity and compassion. He's the son of Scottish immigrants, and he grew up on a sugar plantation in Hawaii. He graduated from the University of Chicago Law School. He served as executive director of Hawaii Legal Services. He has represented institutionalized persons, community groups, social service agencies, mentally challenged persons in the Hawaii League of Women Voters, to name just a few. He's been a professor since 1965. He served as Associate Dean for Academic Affairs from 1988 to 1994. And throughout all these roles at the law school, no matter how tough a decision Dean Johnston has to make, his priority is always to ensure the welfare of all individuals. And he ensures that the welfare of all individuals prevail over and beyond all other concerns. I had the personal honor of serving as one of his associate deans from 1995 to 1998, and Dean Johnston's compassion for every human being he encounters never ceased to amaze me. With great admiration and respect, I introduce Dean Johnston.
Thank you, Susan. And I return that great respect and admiration to you and for all the help you gave me and the people of the school. Thank you so much. I have had the pleasure of working with every dean that has been spoken of here before, except for Edward Lee. However, when I took over as dean, I spent a lot of time reading many of his writings and the writings about him, and what an admirable man he was, and what a tremendous contribution he made to legal education. I would suspect legal education in the United States would be far different today than it is if it weren't for his early fights in what he believed in. That is set a tradition that has been followed most fiercely, I assure you, most fiercely, by his son Noble Lee, who indeed I marched around and doing battle with the ABA, which was an experience in and of itself and quite a thrill. But it continued to establish the reputation of John Marshall and the commitment of Edward Lee's dream. I would say that those who have followed since Noble Lee have continued on in that respect. And indeed, I join all of you most heartily in honoring Fred Herzog, who is really a remarkable man and to a large extent the mentor I've had over the years, and who one day said to me, "You've disappointed me too many times. If you disappoint me again, I will never speak to you in your lifetime." So I took that seriously, and thus I am now dean. But I've also had the benefit of having good colleagues, Glenn Schrager, Peter McGovern, and also of Howard Markey. And when Peter McGovern came, I noticed that the first thing he was faced with was a question of accreditation. I didn't fully appreciate what that meant until I became acting dean to discover that in the next 6 months, we had to put together an accreditation report and meet with the ABA. So that in 1994, we began to work on that. The whole school community, as has been indicated in the past on other projects, put their minds to it and their efforts to it, and we went through the accreditation inspection. The result was that the school was given a clean bill of health. By the time we'd finished working back and forth on the accreditation report, there was one concern left that the ABA had about John Marshall Law School. No violations, only one concern, and that in those days was a rather spectacular result, which is a tribute to the whole school community. The one concern, of course, was that we had no space in which to expand to if we wanted to expand our programs. A kindness would have said that if anybody exhaled, we were in serious trouble because we had no space whatsoever. However, that concern was immediately dissipated when we acquired the top 9 floors of the, as we called it, John Marshall Annex. Some people call it the CBA building, but it's really 321, but it was the John Marshall Annex. And we now have the top 9 floors. And that bit of negotiations went on hot and heavy for a while. And again, as indicated, Lou Biro was the guiding light that worked on those negotiations, along with the other members of the executive committee, Tom Durkin, Al Gallo, and Jim Kraminski, one of the associate deans, did a tremendous amount of work in making sure that it worked out. And of course, the Board of Trustees approved it. I guess it's not a secret that we got the building for some $8 million less than the note that was outstanding at the time, which I thought was a good result, no matter how you measured it. So that another accreditation inspection went on, and once again, the whole school community pulled together. We decided to be members of the North Central Association for many reasons, and indeed, just this year, we were approved in membership of the North Central Association, which gives us a lot more academic credibility, I believe, and from an administrative standpoint, a lot more financial security on federal loans, for which we worry about as an administrator. So that we have been accredited by North Central. We did it in 15 months from the time we started till the time we finished, which most academicians have told us is somewhat of a remarkable feat. We haven't stopped moving along in that direction. Just recently, President Biro, meeting with the representatives of the Association of Governing Boards of Universities and Colleges, has instructed me to work out a membership in that organization, which is designed to assist boards and trustees in the work they have to do on behalf of the school. Another thing we started off with early on was the capital campaign and also the Centennial celebration. Again, a lot of work from a lot of people. Once again, the trustees in the forefront of setting that up and taking the bold steps of saying that they would back it financially, within reason, of course. I'm not sure that we've all agreed upon that I was within reason or that everybody was within reason, but we have done it, and also have proceeded on with the capital campaign, which is still underway and which I suspect at this moment most of you understand we will reach our $11.5 million goal, and at least that before we are done. This is the first really major capital campaign that the school has ever put on. So the school grows in that area. Mention has been made of the Centennial celebration that we have had for the last 2 years. I think it's an outstanding success, in large part due to the major efforts of Professor Ruebner, Gary Watson, Marilyn Thomas, who put in long hours to make sure it worked. Without ignoring or sort of putting aside some of them, some of the events and conferences really come to mind that were spectacular, and maybe they're the most recent. We did have the Barristers' Ball that people referred to. We did have the Chicago Fire that Professor Ruebner was instrumental in putting on. We did have, as mentioned, the celebration in the Daily Plaza, which many of you attended and which was a wonderful celebration. 2 conferences, the 2 recent conferences, perhaps that's why they come to mind immediately. The one on Chief Justice Marshall, which was an outstanding academic success, and then followed by the one on genocide. Both of those were excellent and drew a lot of good attention. so that we can mark up a couple more successes down the way. In the academic area, in order to enhance the JD programs in a somewhat of a volatile market for a while there, we chose to, rather than simply start cutting back as some people did, we chose to try to enhance the JD program by expanding the various LLM programs and centers. And I would say that we have been quite successful. As indicated, the international law area was developed, information technology was there, but we then developed real estate and employee benefits. And we developed master's degrees in all of those to enhance the JD program, as I said, and also to enhance the intellectual property program, which we have substantially expanded on. We now have a new director, Jim Sweeney, associate director, Michelle Bridges, and another full-time faculty member in the area of patent law, Janice Mueller. So that the program has been expanding beautifully, and I'm very pleased with it. I think we should all be pleased with it, particularly since it is now ranked in national ranking as number 9 in the nation. And I'm sure that when we get a little more down the line, it will improve its standing even more. The Center for Trial Advocacy is one of the other centers that doesn't have an LLM, but we have been beginning to develop that. Tremendous contribution from many of the people in that area. It has been ranked number 17 in the nation, in the same ranking that the intellectual property is ranked number 9. It is obviously, with a little more effort, going to be ranked much higher than that within the next couple of years. I assure you of that. We have the staff to do it, we have the colleagues to do it, and we shall do that. And the Fair Housing Center and also the Associated Fair Housing Clinic have been doing spectacular work. The Fair Housing Center does national conferences by invitation on a regular basis, and indeed could become, at least on the conferences part, could become a profit center for us. Many changes have been made, have taken place in the makeup of the schools community. The Board of Trustees has changed somewhat. We have 11 new members on the Board of Trustees in the last couple of years, thanks to the guidance of the existing board, who have seen the wisdom of developing a bunch of new trustees with the energy and will to continue on with the school as we know it. The Alumni Board is out there raising money now. The Alumni Board contributes money on a regular basis to the school for scholarships for students, and indeed one of their projects during the capital campaign is to have a fully funded scholarship for one of the students in the name of the alumni. Since 1994, we have had 8 new full-time faculty members added to the faculty, and to maintain the concept of diversity, 6 of those faculty members are women. The administration of the school was professionalized and somewhat reorganized with the addition of William Powers, Rory Smith, William Chamberlain, Bill Beach, Gary Watson, and Marilyn Thomas, all of whom have made tremendous contributions to raising the image of the school and also doing excellent work in developing recruiting for better students. Our publications, along with the already existing Law Review and Journal of Computer and Information Law, the latter being perhaps one of the sole academic publications in the nation which makes a profit, is complemented with other publications such as the Comment, which is our magazine, the rebirth of the briefcase, which some of you will remember from days gone by, which is indeed the alumni newsletter, and each of the centers for excellence are now putting out, or will shortly be putting out, a newsletter. 1 or 2 of those newsletters, if you've seen them of recent vintage, are really spectacular publications which will do us proud. In all, it's been a busy time. I think, like the others, I would say, much is owed to everybody who is a member of the school community. It's hard to select out one person without omitting somebody who should be recognized. For those of you who have contributed so much, thank you so much. That goes to the staff, to the administration, to the faculty, and to the trustees. And often enough, as has been indicated before, the trustees are many times the unsung heroes who sit there and approve major policy decisions and then figure out how to finance those things so we can do many of the good things that we are now doing and will continue to do. And as I said earlier with my welcoming remarks, I would certainly believe that the tradition established by Edward Lee, which I refer to as his dream now, will continue on to be the principle by which we make decisions in the future that affect all of us and the future of the John Marshall Law School. And thank you so much for your attendance and support.
Good evening. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Bill Beach, and I am the Assistant Dean in the Office of Institutional Development. It occurred to me as I was listening to tonight's speakers, as they discussed the great traditions of the John Marshall Law School, what an impressive institution this is. More importantly, this institution has truly made a difference in legal education in this country. The law school survived the Great Depression, 2 world wars, and countless world-changing events. The skill and foresight of the people that you heard about and saw tonight helped the law school endure and prosper in rather tough times. Today we stand as one of the best of its kind, and I think we should give those who pioneered this tradition a round of applause. Yet for the legacy we spoke of to continue, our future must be as dramatic as our past. Through the Centennial campaign that Dean Johnston talked about, we have helped to ensure that these traditions continue. In the last 3 years, with your assistance, $7 million has been committed to facilities, academic programs, and scholarships. This cumulative total represents the largest philanthropic commitment in the history of the John Marshall Law School. It is wonderful to have members of the Lee family here tonight to ensure that this momentum continues. Therefore, I would like to invite Evelyn and John Lee back up to the podium to talk about an exciting initiative which will link our past to our future. Thank you.
In January of this year, John Lee, his brother Edward, my sister Carolyn, and my sisters Caroline and Congresswoman Nancy Lee Johnson, my niece Karen, and I would ask my cousin Ed and Karen to please stand at the moment. And I met with Dean Johnston, Dean Oswald, Dean Corkery, and Dean Beach to discuss a plan that linked the tradition and heritage of the John Marshall Law School to the legendary influences of my grandfather, Edward, and my father, Noble, had on this school. The result of this meeting was the formation of a $2 million challenge to establish the Edward T. and Noble W. Lee Chair in Constitutional Law. This will be the first chair at the law school, and as such is fittingly dedicated to the Lee Deans and the constitutional foundation of our Federalist system they so profoundly understood and respected.
Both Edward and Noble loved the law. In Noble's case, it dominated his life, not only as Dean of the John Marshall Law School, but as one of the longest-serving members of the Illinois House. In addition to support from the Lee family and alumni during Noble's era, we have enlisted public officials such as Congressman Henry Hyde, Congressman Tom Ewing, Senator Paul Simon, and former Congressman Dan Rostenkowski to help campaign the champion the challenge. We are pleased to see that John Marshall Law School enters its second century of providing legal education. The Lee family chair will assist the law school in its standings among the nation's law school for decades ahead. This chair will embody the spirit and keep alive the dreams and traditions of Edward and Noble Lee. And it is our hope that it will also embody the spirit of the expounder of the Constitution, Chief Justice John Marshall. Thank you.
Having the first chair in the law school's 100-year history, named after two deans whose combined length of service was over 50 years, is truly remarkable. On behalf of the entire Lee family, we are honored and privileged to be part of this historic evening and look forward to being part of the journey into the second century of the John Marshall Law School's history. Thank you.
One last introduction, but before it, I want to take an opportunity on behalf of the school to thank some people. Some you've heard be thanked several times this evening, and forgive me if they're redundant, but a lot of people have contributed to our celebration. First, Gary Watson, the director of our event planning, and all of his staff. Assistant Dean for External Affairs, John McNamara. Mike Kerwin, the director of our media services, who you see back there behind that video camera. Marilyn Thomas, director of public information. And Eileen Breitbart, the director of alumni relations, and her staff for contributing to tonight's events. This last introduction is very special. I introduce Ralph Ruebner, a man without whom this event would not occur. Some of you know him, of course, through his reputation as a great lawyer, great scholar, a great humanitarian. But tonight I want to focus on an even greater talent of his. Ralph thinks it began in 1997 when he undertook the job as chair of the steering committee. But Dean Johnston and I know that it really began 2 years earlier when he and I had a conversation walking back from an event in the springtime. We talked about the need to create a steering committee for the Centennial, and we came to the conclusion that Ralph might be one of the only people who could pull it off. And what a perfect decision that was. There have been at least 50 major events that have occurred during the past 2 years. 50 major events for which Ralph has had oversight, organization, follow-up, budgeting, reviewing the mailings, the marketing, the letters, the publications. He has attended endless meetings. He has made countless phone calls. He has decided diversity of issues, from who should run each program, who might the speakers be, and the type of format for each of them. It's impossible for me in this short time to explain the vast array of tasks and headaches that he voluntarily undertook. But what it is possible for me to do is to express on behalf of the law school our heartfelt thanks and sincere gratitude, and to explain a very special gift that we want to present to him this evening. One of the final tasks that we will be encountering is to prepare a Centennial archive scrapbook. It will have pictures and photographs and programs and letters and as many things as our staff can put together so that we have it forever. We have planned a special volume of this Centennial archive scrapbook for Ralph, and it won't be ready, of course, for several months. But as a symbol of that book, which we are creating for him, I have a little book up here. And inside is a picture of Ralph at one of our kickoff events, the convocation, in September of 1998. And the inscription we have in there says, "Presented with gratitude to Professor Ralph Ruebner, recognizing leadership and vision as chair of the steering committee for the John Marshall Law School Centennial Celebration, September 24th, 1998, to tonight, June 10th, 2000. So at this point, I'd like to ask Ralph to come up here, accept his gift. You all should have champagne in front of you. He's going to make some concluding remarks and then toast the law school. Ralph?
Well, I'm speechless. Thank you very much for this wonderful honor, Susan and Gil and Lou. I'm really touched. In addition to Professors Mel Lewis, Charlie Patton, Art Scheller, and Associate Helen Thatcher, who were previously mentioned tonight by some of our deans, I also would like to recall the distinguished members of our faculty who pass on in the past 25 years. And I hope I don't miss anyone. Anne Luzine and Jerry Berendt have been very kind in the last few minutes to give me the names. And please bear with me. Marion Stouter, Ed Arnolds, whose office I received when I came to John Marshall in 1981, right next to Art Sabin on 2M. And I have to tell you, whose desk I still use today. Kendall Burns, Milt Herman, and his companion throughout the years at the law school, his wife, Therese. Bob Cradiville, Palmer Edmonds, who was a personal friend of the Lee family, of Noble Lee especially. Justice Arthur Goldberg, who was a prominent member of the faculty in the 1930s and 40s, and I know Lou Biro's mentor and teacher of constitutional law and labor law. Ed Brodke, and most recently, Elmer Gertz. And I hope I didn't miss anyone. This is quite a legacy to us, to the John Marshall Law School community. We've come to the concluding remarks, and please join me as we toast the John Marshall Law School to the first 100 years, and may the next 100 years be equally glorious. This concludes the festivities of our centennial.